So let's take a look at what I had here for my project, right? You can see right at the top I have kind of a drop-down menu, right, for who would be taking the quiz. From there, JavaScript would theoretically have it change the title here. So Unit Circle Fun on the answer page would have their name. Um, but what I had imagined, or what I'm like looking to have happen, I guess, once we know more about JavaScript, is to be able to, when you click on this, it would say, it would give the X and the Y, right? Clicking on different parts of the page here, right? It would tell you like the information about that page or the information about that angle. I could also add in more of them, but also I thought about making it so that when you click these buttons here, that the opacity um, would turn off essentially. So if these are totally transparent unless you clicked on them, right? And then you could get the information about that would be cool. Otherwise, I just added that if you clicked on it, then it would show up on the other page. So here's the answer page, right? You can see it would be as though I'd answered Anna, right? And then if I clicked on 90 degrees, then it would show this angle, right? And go from there. Otherwise, converting an angle, right? The the follow through on this really isn't too wild, right? You can see for the drop down menu, um, everything anyway is already within a container fluid class. And then otherwise, like I just have individual rows in here. So pretty much everything I put in a row, this row right here, right, you can see because I have 12 to work with, right, I said, okay, let's just do 5 are empty. And then 4 kind of centered it for me. So I could put this quiz option here, right? Um, and then I would just have a submit button or so at the end, but we'll see that. Um, Otherwise, you can see I have all 12 units here, right, for Unit Circle Fun, for what amounts to a heading, right? You can see the H1 tag that I just left in there because I knew that I was going to need that. But otherwise, yeah, I have this row here. I have an empty 4, and then I have 8 to display this picture, right? I had to use a class and ID tag stuff, right? I could have just said relative distribute that to all of the individual IDs, but instead, for this particular problem or for this particular part of it, I said, yeah, just say top and right, right, to move it to where I need it to be. But otherwise, pretty simple stuff as far as just putting a bunch of buttons on here, right? You can see I have a button and then the class and ID tags are both there. Otherwise, this was kind of cool finding out that the like pi symbol, or sorry, the pi symbol exists here, the degree symbol exists, right, to get those to type in. But W3 Schools has a really great chart on all the different symbols you could probably want that are fairly mathematical. So otherwise, down here, right, I can convert, you would type in some number and then just click radians or degrees, right, and it would go if I had the JavaScript already set up on that. But otherwise, it's really just a button. So the piece that I want to put in there, right, it's just an input. So I'm going to say, okay, yeah, I have an input, and then it's going to be text. But probably should look at that as to whether or not that should be number otherwise. But either way, you can see that, again, I had 12. So I said 5, 4, and 4. And I just wanted to put it in once with 4 so that goes over, but it really doesn't make a difference. So that's why for the other ones I didn't really put, it didn't necessarily add up to 12. I didn't have to put something in the end there. I was just kind of curious to see whether or not it would go over that, and that was cool to see. So otherwise, yeah, moving down a bit, we're getting into problem A. So I say, what quadrant does 451 degrees fall into? Right, I have these different buttons here, and it's hard to make a button just clicked, right? It seems like I would just be able to go directly to the next page if I clicked on one of these rather than leaving it clicked. So I'd like to explore more with that. Slash, I should probably just be using a different type of button per se, because I want to have a submit button down at the bottom here, right, that links to the other page. But otherwise, for B, right, I'm just using radio buttons here, which, or sorry, I'm using, yeah, I don't use any radio buttons on that part there. But the but this more or less just has a checkbox option. Yeah, I guess it makes sense for this to just use radio buttons now that I think about all this. But down at the bottom here, right, in which quadrant is cosine of theta positive, right? Theta is another symbol that you can just find a little command for. But otherwise, to get this stuff to move around, right, I figured that the answers were going to be similarly placed from A to C. So in these two different problems here, right, this one I wanted you to be able to click off different answers, right, to say like, oh, these quadrants x is positive in, or cosine of x is positive in, right? So you'll see that I actually was able to achieve that with classes. So I have A0 through A3. So positions relative for all of them, and then I just move it up or down relative to where it's supposed to be. But the position's the same because it's the same picture or same size image, right, for those two different sets of features. So that worked out really well. And then otherwise, this is a really simple button. It just links to, it just goes ahead and links to the other part B. So in part B, right, I have it pictured there. Whatever the input, right, would be, so if it's 30 degrees, right, it's pi over 6 radians, right. The JavaScript, I'm not sure where it would go, in here or in here, but then that would just be converting your answer for you. Otherwise, 91 degrees, I would want to have it show that angle, right, or 270 degrees for that multiple choice thing to say what corresponds and what doesn't correspond. That wouldn't really require that much extra for JavaScript stuff. And then otherwise for C, same thing. There's kind of a set answer, so it's really just going to be right or wrong, you know, depending on what's clicked. So ideally, you could say, okay, something of A, B, and C, some subset of those are answered, right? So A, there's only one thing to click on here, right? This would be 1 point. There's 5 points, right? True or false there, and then you'd have out of these, are these is cosine of theta positives is really asking 4 questions in one, kind of. So then all that would add up to 10 points, and theoretically it would be able to answer, or it would be able to tabulate in the JavaScript here whether or not you had answered a given question, and if so, add it to the denominator. If you got it right, add it to the numerator as well for a given point. So out of 10 points, it should be able to print off what the answer or what your score was, just taking your fraction, right, of how many you got right, and then multiplying it by 100, printing it out. Other cool stuff though, the thing that I really wanted to do, or that I'd like to be able to do in JavaScript, is to be able to just take a unit circle, right, or to have just the plane drawn and have a circle drawn over it, and then to put over circles to show that to show that the angle isn't there. So what you would need to do basically is just have a full regular circle, right, to achieve that instead of just inputting a picture like I did here. And this is kind of outlined enough in the JavaScript, or like I just wrote notes on how I would achieve a number of these effects here. But I would draw the whole circle, and then if it's in quadrant 1, then quadrant 2, 3, and 4 would be covered up, right? So cover up all the quadrants basically that don't have anything else going on. But otherwise, yeah, you'd say, okay, cover up all the quadrants that are uninvolved, and for the quadrants that are left, right? So for, like, let's say I have something in quadrant 1 here, right? If I were at a 60-degree angle, then just draw another empty rectangle all the way from wherever that point is, leftward and upward, and then that would cover up the rest of that. So you'd actually be able to see how far that arc, you know, would go. And I feel like I could do that in JavaScript, because really it's just putting squares over another image, so that seems like it would work pretty readily. So it's just a matter of getting that stuff to interact. So my answers in JavaScript, to get that to interact with the HTML to print those numbers out to print rectangles, but it's pretty straightforward. Otherwise, interesting things that I had to play around with. When I first made these pages, it worked out really, really well. As far as like the formatting of it was pretty simple, right? Like all the stuff got plugged in. I really I like the HR tags to make it a lot more organized. But as far as organizing the stuff on the page here, right, the columns worked really, really well. I was actually really excited to get that all to work with Bootstrap, because I don't have I have relatively significantly less experience with that. And then to move stuff around from there, just position relative, moving stuff top right was really simple. But I feel like my CSS otherwise is really not that inspiring otherwise, you know. So like all images, I said just be 300 by 300. Give them a border there. All paragraphs, you know, I said that I just want them to be gray, centered, and 20px, that's just the size. But yeah, the text line center made it so that if I had a certain number of columns, then it would center it over those number of columns that I gave it, which gave it a pretty nice looking effect there. Otherwise, yeah, the heading at the very top, it should be A0A, which is that kind of purpley pinkish color. And then the whole background should be blue. So like I said, the CSS was pretty simple in both of these. but I really liked playing around with the Bootstrap stuff. And again, when I originally created this page, the images didn't necessarily save or seem to save right. So when I copied and pasted my answer into the list that we all have on Slack there, right, of everyone's project, I opened it up again and it seemed totally fine. But then I tried opening it up in different browsers and like in incognito mode, right, just to see if it would run properly. And for some reason, everything was um, really all over the place. You know, that there were just different, like the images were gone, and then all of these different buttons, you know, were just completely unorganized throughout the page. So I talked with Jin, and he said, yeah, you know, you're going to need to upload your images directly, and then you just use those links instead. So if you go over here to assets, right, you could see that I dragged in all those images, and then I can copy that URL and use it otherwise. And then that way it doesn't get any issues with server requests. So then the images always load in properly. So no matter what, when I copy and paste the whole page now, it always looks right. So as far as the interactivity of the page in general goes, like I said, I'd really like to be able to get more from the JavaScript here. But the learning process on this I felt really good about because I did a lot of the base first. You know, this time I experimented with not really updating the page as much. Like I turned the Wi-Fi off, tried to get the whole base of the program, and then had to go from there. Because I felt really confident with the Bootstrap, and I said, okay, I'm not going to really need to organize the page as much, you know, horizontally. Because really, once you put everything into rows, you know, I really felt that that would work well for each question. So I wanted to make it as like quizzical, or to have like different elements of the page rather than having them be too organized otherwise. I could have added a video, you know, like I said, I think this should actually be radio buttons now that I'm like thinking this through, but or like seeing this with fresh eyes. But otherwise, I really liked the process of working through Bootstrap, because again, really all you need to do is once you put everything in the container class, that container fluid class, everything is just, okay, yeah, you're going to have a row, every element that I already had existing there, right, with a really basic web page. You say, okay, everything gets a row. Within each row, there's just going to be a div for class, and then you have to specifically say, okay, this element is going to be in like this width of that many sections. You know, so if you get 12 sections overall, you say, okay, I have 5, then I have 4, and then I'm going to use another however many left on the remaining pieces there. So I liked the way that I organized it, and it really gave me a good understanding of what Bootstrap was able to do in that sense, right? Obviously, there are other things that I could do. Like I could say, okay, yeah, use the danger class here if I wanted to make that red. But otherwise, I didn't think that that was going to add really too much to it, but I really, really did like the organizational elements of all this. So that all worked out really well. But the process, again, of saying, the process, I guess, for this was really different for me. I said, okay, I'm going to use FCC when I have to reference stuff, you know, so I just looked at like one Bootstrap example to say, okay, I think it's the responsive Bootstrap, like individual lesson from that HTML. I was able to say, okay, yep, here's how I do the different button types, right? So if I have checkboxes or radio buttons or just like a standard button, if I have inputs, all of that was on that one page there. So just loading that up was able to give me a lot. But I think what's working well for me is to be able to just try to get as far as I can. And then whenever I need one additional resource to say, okay, plug in all that different stuff. I don't think that's necessarily as quick, but I feel like it's helping me learn a lot more. Because I like having the problems just get solved over time rather than to say, okay, yeah, like let's just tackle all these things at once. I'm fine with it being in like clear layers to say, oh, I need to do this section, then I need to do this section. So when I was actually building this out, I said, okay, I'm going to make sure that this page is good. Other than I knew I had to format those buttons. I did that last. But I said, okay, yep. Now I'm going to have another HR in here. This section is cut off. I can fix this. I can fix this. I can fix this. Fix that. And it went well. But again, I would be cautious to do it like that, I guess, as things get more complicated. I guess at this point, I'd like to add in the JavaScript after the fact. I wouldn't want to add it in now, but I think I could take this project and add in whatever features we learn how to do going forward. I think that's probably how I would do it all the time, but I don't know whether or not that's the most efficient. So again, I thought I learned a lot in the process of doing this, or like how to um, be more efficient, or how to like learn how to program better, or how to organize like my HTML and stuff better. I had a really good sense of that, but otherwise it's a fun project. Like I would actually use this web page, so I'm excited to actually put this on the web, I guess, at some point. So fantastic.